I had to find what was like me that I could put into the character so that I could have something myself to play with. Because essentially my tracking in this show, play all the bad guys, but you don't want to play the bad guy, you want to find out how he's the hero because everyone's their own hero. So I had to find what was like me in the characters so that I could throw that spice on top that makes him appear as if he's the bad guy, when in his own world he's the good guy. So I had to approach my characters that way, because they're mainly bad guys. And then from there, also one big thing for I think all of us was to find the difference between our characters, be it physically or vocally or with the dialects, so that we don't confuse the kids by playing 5 different characters with the same instrument. So we had to manipulate that a little bit, so we had to play with that.
I think that's a big part of it, is that we're sort of playing the whole fabric of the city. So, I mean, us, essentially you saw Bob and Charles, but then we play basically every other character. So I think it's our job to bring out what those other faces are of the city. And so I think for me, I brought in, like you said, I am those characters. Like, I'm not, you can't just put something on yourself and pretend to be it. So when I'm playing the Irish worker or the street sweep, they're just me, but in different circumstances. So I think we're just sort of approaching it and giving them each their own distinct voice and giving them each their own physicality and whatnot. But I think that it really helps make the story more fluid.
Well, to bounce off of that, when I first auditioned for the show and I was reading up on the different characters, they brought different British characters to mind from like films and TV shows that I've watched. Like, I'm a huge Jane Austen fan, so like Mrs. Traddles reminded me a little bit of Mrs. Bennet in Pride and Prejudice, and so I brought that in there. And then with like the woman in white, she reminded me of the beggar woman in Sweeney Todd. So I brought that in there. So since this is a newer show and you don't really have anything to base your characters off, I guess, because it hasn't been performed before, I take pieces from other things that I'm familiar with.
And actually, to invert that, I think it's interesting that it's a new show, but it's old material. It's
right.
Like, it's old Dickensian England, and we think of those characters as sort of archetypical. We know who those people are, but this is the raw material. This is essentially before Charles Dickens knew what he was going to write about. So I think it's interesting to use that raw version of what we think of as a Dickensian character. Like, oh, we know that person. Well, who did that person come from? So far, not of mine, but my favorite character is Squeeze.
That's what I was gonna say. That's mine
Squeeze,
too.
like, there's something about him that's different than everybody else. When he's definitely, when we're off stage, we are always watching him when he comes on his Squeeze.
Yeah.
That's a fun one.
Yeah.
Probably Eryn's track. Just because, even though they're ladies, which can be fun to play, I think that there's so much strength in those characters that she does a really good job with. And then the woman in white is just awesome, just because there's so much that we don't know, but it gives the actor plenty of room to create their own story with her. I just think it's great.
I would really want to play Squeers, but also I would really like to play KRIEGER, because I think that character is really fun, and he's really, I guess, the only bully in the show.
Yeah, like, he's the boss. Squeeze is a boss, but Parker's sort of just like, I'm just gonna press your buttons.
Yeah, and I think that's a lot of fun, and there's a lot of different things you can do with that. And he's Irish, so he's got the whole Irish accent going on as well, and I don't get to explore with that in my character, so that would be something fun.
Yeah, we explore a lot with class as opposed to geography, I think, and so it's interesting to see someone who's kind of, I mean, we don't treat him as an outsider, he sort of is the insider in his little world, but it's interesting to see how those dynamics work out.
I think my story that really got me to theater didn't really start with theater as much as playing Army in South Carolina with all my friends. We would all just play make-believe and do all that kind of stuff. And I always had the biggest imagination and always wanted to do more, go further, and then more importantly, never stop pretending, essentially. And then when I found out in high school, I was like, it doesn't have to stop. I can keep doing this in college. Okay, I'll do that. And then it just kept snowballing, and here we are.
I remember I was probably like 5 or 6, like I was very young, and I did a production of Charlotte's Web, and I played the goat. And we did this thing in it that I like spat in a spittoon, and I remember like that kind of thing, and it would ding, and it always got a laugh. And I remember thinking like, oh, when I do that thing, those people laugh. That's funny. I want to do more of that. So then I just beat it into the ground until it wasn't funny anymore. I had to find the next thing.
So I kind of have a goat story too. So I don't really know what it was that made me want to perform. I just always wanted to do it since I was a little kid. But in preschool, around Christmas time, we did this nativity show. And I wanted to play Mary, because I wanted to be the star, of course. And I wasn't cast as Mary, I was cast as a goat. so I had like a little goat mask, and I played the goat in our little nativity show in preschool. And I guess that was like one of the first things I did, and I've just always wanted to perform since.